Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Thursday, August 24th, 2023. Tonight, we're going to be talking about accountability. I'm really excited about that because I think I have some uncommon sense to share with you about it. And I think a lot of it will resonate with you intuitively. Before I get into the content, what I wanted to talk about, of course, again, was the upcoming Conscious Parenting Seminar. Our next iteration of the Conscious Parenting Seminar will be September 29th, 2023. That's 9 a.m., 9:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. It's a virtual Zoom event, $400 per person, $700 for a couple if you share a screen. And we keep it small and limited on purpose so that it's a dialogue. I'll be presenting in the morning, I'll be presenting in the afternoon, and then in between those, or in addition to those, we'll have discussions about your specific situation, your specific case. So if you want to expand on your experience from watching the webinars or from listening to the podcasts, this is that day. I love this day. It goes by really fast. I always get a little nervous. It's a daunting experience to imagine going into a relatively small group session for 7 hours. We have a lunch break in the middle, but it goes by so fast because there's so much to talk about and there's so much positive energy. So look forward to that. Contact intensives@evoketherapy.com if you're interested. With that, let's talk about accountability. First of all, I want to read something from a book called Motivational Interviewing. Motivational Interviewing is a book that most therapists regard as an important concept and set of tools and ideas to help bypass resistance, to help not engage resistance, to help break through with difficult situations that clients are struggling with. So let me read about denial, about what Stephen Rolnick, one of the authors, says about denial. He says, denial could be viewed as the expression of a dysfunctional relationship, meaning between the therapist and the client, and damaged rapport, and could be transformed in a positive direction by using a more collaborative style with the clients. I realized with some shock that the personal and professional inclination to blame, judge, and label others for being quote unquote resistant and quote unquote not motivated was not confined to the addiction field. It popped up in just about every care setting I came across. Motivational interviewing provided a different way of approaching these conversations about change. So what we're going to talk about today is this idea of accountability and specifically what we parents, spouses, what we loved ones do to actually contribute to that resistance, contribute to that lack of accountability, to that wall that people put up. So that's the twist on it today. It's not just how do you work with resistance and encourage and foster accountability, but more specifically, what might you be doing to actually contribute to the very problem that you're curious in addressing? I love this quote from Carl Rogers. Carl Rogers is considered by most to be one of the master therapists, one of the greats who ever lived. And he said this. He said, the curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. And I think as parents, there's this escalating cycle that we have with our children. Sometimes it happens between spouses, of course. It can happen in any relationship where we're pushing for accountability, pushing for honesty, pushing for someone to take responsibility for themselves, to become really more conscious of what's going on for them. But the great irony, the great paradox is that pressure, that push, that drive is the very thing that drives them into further hiding. And we all know that when we're on the receiving end of being questioned about something. Every single person, I'm sure of this, every single person listening to my voice or watching this tonight can relate to the fact that when pushed into a corner or when they make a mistake, that the thing that contributes to their ability to confess, if you will, to open up, to let the wall down, is a sense of safety. And that when somebody puts us in a corner, points their metaphorical or literal finger at us, that we don't feel safe. So part of what we're going to talk about today is that dynamic about what we can do to encourage that opening, that letting down of the wall. First and foremost, how do you teach accountability to your children? And the answer is a simple one. You model it for them. And the same kinds of challenges that you're going to have around accountability, the same exact response that you're going to have around accountability are the same exact excuses that your children have for not being accountable. It's not the whole story. It's not completely my fault. I'm not completely responsible. I'm justified in my responses. I've told the story of a mother that I was working with years ago when a child was blaming her for his bad behavior, for lack of a better word, and went on to emphasize, saying to his mother, I didn't feel safe around you. You forced me to lie. And you did this by judging my friends, the way that they looked, whether or not they belonged to our specific religion, to our congregation. And I was put in a position where I had to lie to protect myself. And rather than doing what I think most of us would feel the impulse to do, which is to say, ultimately, you can't blame others for your lying. You have to take responsibility. This mother did something remarkable, and she said to her son in response to his pointed accusations, she said to him, because of her own work, and it wasn't fake, it wasn't a technique, it was honest, she said, you're right. I did do those things. And you could see her son's shoulders relax. You could see his defense go down almost visually. And then he started to open up with some accountability. And that's what happens in our marriages, doesn't it? That's what happens in our work relationships. That's what happens in our friendships. So after the session concluded, this young man then left the room, and I had a couple of more minutes with the mother. And the mother asked me the question that I'm asking here, which is, okay, but how do I teach him that he's ultimately accountable for his behavior? And I said to her very simply, you just did. You just did the thing. So if you wonder why your children might struggle with accountability, a critical ingredient in that recipe, a critical element of that equation might very well be that it hasn't been modeled for them. Their parents weren't easy to apologize. They weren't quick to admit fault or mistakes. And that the family was operating like most do, like many do, on this plane of who's most right, who's most wrong, who's good, who's bad. Tion Dayton, a wonderful psychodramatist and therapist, writes, our children don't become who we tell them to be. They become who we are. As a therapist, I need no convincing that children live in the affective space between their parents. They live in their unspoken and sometimes unfelt emotional world. Much of parenting is implicit rather than explicit, which is why children become who we are rather than who we tell them to be. Our children drink us up like little sponges. We are showing them who we want them to become, unquote. When I read this years ago, over a decade ago, and when I first started presenting on topics and used this as a reference, I didn't see it as vividly as I see it today. I saw it, I understood it, but today it's obvious to me as I've done more and more of my work. And to be clear, the result of doing work isn't the conclusion that I'm healed and I've arrived and I figured it out and all of my relationships and my communication and my awareness and health is healthy. That's not the outcome of work. And that's what most people think. The outcome of work in terms of, as far as I've arrived at, is I have issues. I'm hard to live with. My wounds are sometimes driving this thing. My trauma responses, my defenses hurt other people around me. Yes, I've made a lot of progress, but the evidence, the greatest evidence of my progress that I can see, the greatest evidence of my progress is how well I can see all of my faults and flaws and how they affect the people that I love, the people around me. How able and easily it is for me to apologize. Just recently, there was an incident where something happened around the house. I could have easily got away with it not being my fault. I could have blamed it on the children. I could have blamed it on happenstance. In fact, initially, that was my first inclination, my first impulse. But I came to my wife and I said, that was me who left things that way. That was me who did that. And I even said to her, I was tempted to let it go. It wasn't a big deal. It wasn't a huge deal. But I was tempted to let it go. But it was me. And she said to me, thank you. And what I wanted to say to her, and it wasn't, it took up no more space between us than that. But what I wanted to say to her is, I'm starting to feel safe enough in my life. I'm starting to feel good enough about myself that those kinds of confessions come easier than they did 5 or 10 years ago. You know, one of the concerns, one of the benefits of doing a broadcast like this and not having a face-to-face discussion is I can say a whole lot of things and you can't really respond. You can write things in the chat or send me an email later, but ultimately you're just an audience. You're a passive audience in this format, at least. And one of the awarenesses I have is when I say things and teach things like I'm teaching tonight, I can imagine folks on the other end saying, this is ridiculous. I tuned in tonight to learn how to help my kid be accountable, and this guy's talking about my accountability. And I'm not the one with the problem. My life is intact. I'm not the one with the substance abuse problem, the self-harm, the suicidality, the school refusal, the oppositionality. I didn't get arrested. My life is going pretty well. I'm functioning. So where does he get the idea? Where does he get the gall to confront me on my accountability? But this is the courageous work. This is the heroic work. This is what I believe. This is what distinguishes the Evoke model, the Evoke therapy programs model from most others, is that the work for parents is parent work. The work that I teach about and present about and write about, the work that I teach our therapists about and ask them to talk to you about. The work that we do at our intensive program for all of the non-identified patients, right? The parents of, the spouses of, the siblings and the children of the identified patient. The work that we do at Evoke, that we talk about at Evoke, is looking at yourself. And that's not passing the buck. That's not I'm not your child saying, don't pick on me, you have enough problems. I'm an objective third party saying, this is the way that it works. This is how it happens. Fred Rogers said this. He said, I don't think anyone can grow unless he's loved exactly as he is now. Listen to that. It's the same message. I could read thousands of quotes from wise people. I don't think, he says, I don't think anyone can grow unless he's loved as he is now. Appreciated for what he is rather than what he will be. And you know that in your soul. You know when you're given grace. And I'm not talking about religious grace. I'm talking about forgiveness. I'm talking about leeway. I'm talking about an allowance for humanity. You know that the first impulse is often an increase in a willingness to be accountable. If a friend or a spouse or somebody comes to you and says, you know what, that fight earlier, my stuff was all over it. My fingerprints were all over it. I had a bad day at work. I had a bad day at school. I was struggling. I snapped at you. You all know that even in that little silly little anecdote that I just gave, you can feel the energy, the impulse from the other side of the equation to say, you know what, it wasn't all you. I also had my part in this conversation, this argument, this conflict. That's how it works. And so to simply crack somebody open, to take off their armor, to tear it apart, to strip them bare, leaves them worse off than they were when they had the defense intact. It might be satisfying to you and your ego. I know it is for me when I can do that to somebody, but it doesn't help the individual, doesn't help the child move farther along in their life. One of the things that I've seen over the years is that we have this assignment of a parent writing a letter of accountability to the child, which is essentially what the parent has done, the mistakes that they've made, the issues that they have brought to bear in the relationship that are problematic. And when there is resistance to this, as there is, I would venture to say about half of the time, what do you imagine is the parents' resistance? What do they say when we present the idea of the letter of accountability to the child? And I'll pause for just a moment for you to think about that. Why would a parent be resistant to writing a letter of accountability to a child in a treatment program? And the answer is the most common by a very, in fact, it's almost exclusively. The reason that they're resistant is they say, my child's going to use this against me. And what I say to parents is, if you write a well-written letter of accountability, they can't use it against you. Because a well-written letter of accountability, which is similar to an amends letter, right? An apology letter, similar to just a healthy apology. If you want to learn more about healthy apologies, read Harriet Lerner's book on apologies entitled "Why Won't They Forgive Me?" I think is the name of it. A letter of accountability is like those. It asks for nothing in return. It is a gift, an expression of love, of generosity. It says, here is my amends. You can do with it what you want. If you throw it in the garbage, if you throw it back in my face, if you use it as an excuse to justify your behavior, you can do all of that. I'm not giving it to you with strings attached. This is not transactional. I'm not using it to quote unquote manipulate you. I'm not using it to get you to apologize even for your side. I'm doing it as an expression of an abundance of love that I have. First starting with me, and subsequently that I have for you. That's what a letter of accountability or a letter of amends looks like. It also illustrates, when parents are resistant to the idea of writing a letter of accountability, that they are operating, creating, and fostering a family culture of competition. Who's right and who's wrong? Who's most right and who's most wrong? When I teach accountability to parents, one of the things I say is, you can apologize and take 100% responsibility for 2% of the problem. That's the only purview you have, is what's your contribution to it. And besides the fact that a true or authentic letter of accountability or amends, it has all of this energy in it, like I've been describing, what outcome, what effect does it tend to have? Like I've said earlier, although you can't guarantee this, and if you get yourself attached to this outcome, you're in trouble. But what does it tend to do? What energy does it tend to encourage and to foster? And that is mutual accountability, like I said. The child starts to feel, they start to see what it's like for somebody to be human. Right? That's what we're trying to teach people how to do here, to be human. That's what the Barbie movie is about. That's what Pinocchio was about. That's what really all the movies are about, the hero's journey movies. That's what Frozen is about, right? That's what they're about. It's about, I'm human. But we've been so conditioned in this world to imagine that the goal is to be good. We lose our humanity and we don't model it for our children. And it feels vulnerable and scary, because the culture that we have inherited from our contexts, from our childhood, from our culture, we have fostered in our families, and the game is who's right, who's in charge, who has the most power. And if I'm more right, I have more power. Children in this process, if we do a good job with children in treatment, they will eventually expose the parents' immaturity, right? They will eventually be able to accurately assess and analyze you and point out your immaturity. I want to tell you a cool story. I thought about this. My daughter, I talk about a lot of faults and a lot of faults and flaws of myself and my family, but I want to share this with you because it was so cool. This is so rare. My 15-year-old daughter was with a friend. And my 15-year-old daughter, going back to school, got her nails done. And they were a little longer than average. and they were just playing around, horsing around, and the friend grabbed her hand and hit her pinky finger in such a way that it broke the nail off, lifted it off the skin. And you can imagine how painful that is if you've had anything like that. And this was a bad one. And as my daughter, as tears were coming from her eyes and she was complaining and probably swearing at the time, I wasn't present, but upset about the pain that she was feeling, her friend kept apologizing. I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. And eventually my 15-year-old daughter said to her 15-year-old friend, stop apologizing, because now it's becoming clear that I need to take care of you. And that was really, really cool. But what's even as cool as that is the friend said, after a thoughtful pause, I have a lot to work on, I guess. I didn't teach her to say that. I didn't tell her what that was. That's in what we talk about. That's some really deep relational psychology there that not many 15-year-olds have access to. But she was able to take the soup, if you will, the Reedy family soup, and she was able to integrate it and show some really high level psychology. And that's why when she's pointed out some of my faults and flaws and my wife's faults and flaws, it has been incredibly indicting and accurate and true. Parents resist writing accountability because they're still caught on the dynamic of power and control and right and wrong. J.D. Gill writes in one of her books, both cruel people and inadequate therapists are famous for a desire to destroy defenses without considering the consequences. I think most of us imagine that therapy looks like a therapist confronting defenses with the client. You're justifying, you're rationalizing, you're in denial. We imagine that that's what a therapist is, having not been trained. In fact, the funny thing about imagining that is that much of therapy is that for the untrained clinician. In fact, it says it here, both cruel people and inadequate therapists, which are most of them by a pretty large amount, are famous for a desire to destroy defenses without considering the consequences. Children need their dignity. Human beings need their dignity. I've said this to my wife in the last year. I've said, you know, when I'm struggling to own up to something, which happens, when I'm struggling to speak my authentic and vulnerable truth, it doesn't help when you start to escalate and become demanding about it. I feel more and more scared and want to withdraw more and more into myself. So think about it. In psychology, it's pretty simple. The individual builds a wall around themselves. The wall is proportionate to the amount of safety or the amount of threat that they feel in their life. The more threat, the less safe they feel, the higher, thicker, more fortified the wall will be. The wall is the defense, right? The wall is the defense that we place around ourselves. The defense is the symptom. And if a defense has a certain pattern and is consistent enough, we call that defense a diagnosis. So that's basically how human beings work. There's the real self behind the defense, and then there's the defense to protect oneself from the attacks. And if you walk up to somebody who's fortified and defended, and you walk up to them with a pickaxe or a hammer or a chisel, what are they going to feel? They're going to feel threatened. Now, it doesn't matter that you'll say to them, as we say to our children, it's for your own good. The defenses are ruining your life. The defenses are keeping you more in a prison than they are giving you the protection that you say that you want. We can give all those speeches. We can even say that our pickaxe is love. Our jackhammer is love. We can justify our approach all that we want. But the fact of the matter is that the tearing down of the wall, the attacking of the defense, makes the person feel more scared. Makes the person feel more reserved. That's why even, or maybe most specifically in severe cases of abuse, imagine a child who has a significant abuse incident or story. I'm talking about, think of one in the extreme sense. You don't come in as a therapist and just start going right at it. You honor the defense. You wait until they feel safe. So how do you get somebody to take down that wall? Because if you come at it with a pickaxe and a hammer, they're going to build it up. They're going to refortify it. They're going to build it larger and thicker, taller, change material, if you will. Maybe run away and escape. How do you encourage the letting down of that wall? Drop your tools. Drop your weapons of attack that you call love. Ask questions, get curious, model it for them. Take off your armor. Start talking about your struggles with peer pressure and ego. Virtually every parent can relate to the feeling or the sense of what it feels like to share with the world your own struggles in your own family around mental health, mental illness, and symptoms. If you can relate to that, you can relate to what it feels like to your child. The reason I tell you to go to Al-Anon and Codependence Anonymous and Families Anonymous and Adult Children of Alcoholics, the reason I want you to go to that is because there's wonderful and valuable lessons there. But even if you don't get those lessons, you'll know what it feels like to be asked to go to something that you might not even believe that you need. Sound familiar? And introduce yourself to a group of strangers and then have to confess what your issues are and what brought you into that program. Does any of that sound familiar to you? That's essentially what we're doing to our loved ones when we, in the case of children, send them to treatment, or in the case of spouses and siblings and parents, invite them to treatment. So go to those meetings just for that. That's enough. And hopefully, if you are aware and honest enough with yourself, you'll come away with greater humility on the difficulty of what you're asking your child to do. You're asking them to get rid of the things that protect them. Carl Jung said that neuroses, or think of the word mental illness as a catch-all phrase, neuroses is a substitute for legitimate suffering. That is, that yes, the neuroses, yes, the mental illness causes problems. Yes, the substance use disorder causes problems. Yes, the anxiety, the school refusal, the self-harm, the suicidality, the obsessive compulsive behavior, the oppositionality, all of that causes problems and suffering. Yes. But what Jung knew and what we know now is that there's a deeper, more authentic suffering that protects against. I got kicked out of school. I dropped out of school in high school for good. Went back years later and got an equivalency degree. And then years later went to college. I didn't drop out of school because I was overmatched, but because I was anxious about living up to all the expectations of my potential. I've been told since I was a little kid that I was smart and capable and could score at the top of the class. So I finally was overwhelmed by that pressure and I sank my own boat, shot myself in the foot, as they say, because I wanted to take control back of my circumstances. I would rather fail, trying to fail, than try and succeed. And I wasn't worried about failing, by the way. I was worried about not being the smartest person in the class. That's what I was worried about. I wasn't worried about getting a B or even an A minus. I was worried about not having the highest score in the class because that's what I was told that I was capable of. So you see, the defense and our approach to it is counterintuitive. And that's why as a psychotherapist, you have to unlearn, and many therapists struggle with it. You have to unlearn all that you've learned, all the conditioning, all that our culture teaches us. And that's why these lessons are often told best in stories and in metaphor, because most people are resistant to them. To be accountable, one must feel safe. Power dynamics must be at a minimum. Where there is power, connection will suffer. I wrote this in The Audacity to Be You. In a staff meeting recently, I was pondering those tools, pointing to the 8 tools for communication and relationships. I was pondering those tools as one of our staff asked about my suggestion that simply confronting people's defenses often leads to refortification of the defense. Telling a client, for instance, you're justifying or you're in denial can provoke the defense. The staff member asked me, isn't challenging them helpful for their growth? He asked, explaining how confronting the defense can serve to reinforce them or drive the underlying injury further underground, only to reappear somewhere else in some other form, I advised, be with them. Listen to this. Be with them so they feel safe enough to let down the wall. I don't confront justifying. I don't. I don't, no matter who the client is. I don't confront justifying, but clients do it less and less with me over time. I pointed to a poster where the list of the upcoming 8 tools, later talked about in the book, hung on the wall and explained. Those skills and tools don't make you enlightened. But if you were enlightened, you would use these tools. This is how you would talk and relate to others. It is this way of being that makes the difference in the relationship. So mom, dad, husband, wife, brother, sister, friend, loved one. This is transformative. This is deeper than a skill set. Our children don't become, as Dr. Dayton says, they don't become who we tell them to be. They become, in essence, who we are. They live in the affective space between us. They adopt and inherit the culture. That's what the dynamic is about. In our program, we changed years ago. It was called the letter of accountability that the child writes. We still ask the parents to write one because they're the adult. But we changed it from a letter of accountability to a letter of awareness. Because again, we felt like it was less threat. Accountability for me, especially to the person in the relationship with less power, feels like it's loaded with too much power. It, in essence, is pointing to the person with less power saying, come clean. Admit to your faults, admit to your mistakes, admit to your intention, own your unconscious drives. That's too overwhelming for most of us. So we change it to the letter of awareness, which is essentially, it's the same assignment. But the idea is that awareness comes only when we battled guilt. Awareness comes only when we've created a situation or it's been created for us where we feel safe. Awareness comes when we're able to look at ourselves honestly and confess first to ourselves who we are and then to another person. And yes, mom and dad, you can use and exercise your power, your leverage. Dr. Smith, whoever the therapist is, you can use your leverage, especially in wilderness therapy. You can use your power and your leverage to coerce a person into confession. But that's not the real work. The real work is healing, not confessing. Confessing is a means to that healing or evidence of that healing. But we're trying to heal people, not make them good or right. We're trying to heal them, the wounds, the fear, the trauma. The impact letter, we ask children to write an impact letter to a parent, but we don't ask a parent to write an impact letter to a child. Because child development, child psychology, attachment theory tells us that's the appropriate exchange of information. So the child writes a letter to mom and dad saying, here's what you did that affected me. And the impact letter, to be honest with you, is a much better assessment of somebody's accountability than a letter of awareness or a letter of accountability. You can hear in between the lines. The problem with some assignments is they're so easy to interpret on their surface that the brighter, more verbal, more psychologically minded, more therapy wise the client is, the better it is to hide behind the skills and the tools. So instead of having your child write a letter of accountability, we change it to a letter of awareness. And maybe even before that, or right next to that, we ask them to write an impact letter to you, talking about what you did that hurt them. All the small T's, big T's if there are, but all the small T traumas. See, it's this simple. Symptoms are a manifestation of unprocessed, unfelt, undealt with emotions. That's pretty simple. It's more complex than that with neurology, of course, but by and large, symptoms are the unexpressed needs, the unfelt feeling. the unrealized needs that a person has. They come out sideways, backwards. The secrets that we keep become the proverbial monsters under the bed, monsters in the closet. They become the addictions, the pathology, the rage. If we can give a voice, if we can give the anger, the hurt, a stage, then the person doesn't need the symptoms anymore. And so, yeah, we're going to start with the usual suspects, which are parents, mom and dad, or mom and mom, dad and dad. We're going to start with the parents. We're going to put you first and foremost in the hot seat. Not because you're to blame, not because it's all your fault, but because that's what the child is feeling and doesn't feel capable, able, safe enough to express it. The implied message after listening to that we don't have to say and shove in their face is, okay, your parents are extraordinarily human. Better than some, worse than others. We agree. And by listening to that story that they tell, the implied message is, now what are you going to do? Every parent dents their children. Every parent is flawed. Every parent is imperfect and unenlightened. Every parent has wounds that have them. And they act it out unknowingly and justify themselves the same way that you do. And they might never change. We hope. We love them. We'll be patient and we'll try to encourage change. But let's, for the sake of the thought experiment, assume that they will never change. Now, what are you going to do about it? How will you live your life? And by the way, it's not going to stop with mom and dad. It's going to be boyfriends and girlfriends and partners. It's going to be teachers. It's going to be bosses. It's going to be professors. It's eventually going to be your spouse. It's eventually going to be your children. And what are you going to do with this life of living and bumping into all of these imperfect souls, walking around bumbling just like the rest of us, at times hurting you? How are you going to deal with that? The road to accountability goes through awareness. And in order to travel that road, one must do battle with guilt and shame. If we can do battle with guilt and shame, we can be honest with ourselves. I've told the story many times, but I think it illustrates it really well, of my mother coming up after me after hearing a talk that I gave and walking up to my brother and myself and contemplating this message that I just gave, saying to us, I'm starting to think that maybe some of the ways that I parented you guys wasn't that good. And I'm feeling horrible about it. And I said to her, I can't do anything about the horrible feeling. Nothing I can do about that. I don't need that. I imagine my brothers don't need that either. In fact, the horrible feeling is probably going to prevent you from being able to see yourself clearly. So you're going to have to figure that one out. But if you are able to somehow put that guilt and that shame aside enough that you're able to see yourself clearly, it could be a real gift to your children, especially the two that haven't gone to therapy. It could be a real gift for you to admit the mistakes that you made. But of course, my mother went back into her old position and still to this day is so haunted by guilt and shame and by the fantasy, the psychotic idea that she could someday be good in this lifetime, that she finds it intolerable to fully embrace her darkness, to fully embrace her humanity. That's the work, folks. That's what you're being invited to do. You want to know how to teach accountability? Model it. Show it. How do you model it and show it? You grapple with shame and guilt, and you grow up. And you become the adult and the parent, not the child. Sometimes when we listen to our children talk and they're not telling us the truth or the most insightful thing, I tell you to listen to your child as if they're telling you about a dream. Right? Dreams are the most honest communication that we have with ourselves. But they are coded in symbols and stories that confuse us and don't make sense. With some training and practice, you can learn to interpret dreams. And dreams don't lie. Since the ego is asleep, the ego isn't filtering things to a large degree. The dream is just spouting truth and cloaking it in symbolism. So when a child says, "You never loved me," you can hear them as if they're talking about a dream. My child isn't feeling valued. Nobody ever said anything nice to me. You know that's not true. So you translate that like they're telling you about a dream, and you think, right now, they're not feeling appreciated for the progress. But what do we want to do? We want to argue, we want to debate, we want to defend ourselves, right? Sounds just like our children, just like what they're doing in our program. We want to do those things because we haven't worked out ourselves. We haven't. Because when we work out ourselves, we will sound like the other enlightened souls that have done so, and we will easily, effortlessly, spontaneously admit our wrongdoings. Not from a place of shame and guilt, but actually because of the absence of shame and guilt. Like I mentioned, if you want to lower defenses, if you want to teach accountability, you have to reduce the threat. And reframing, drilling into a child's defenses as love doesn't make it so. It doesn't make it love. Confronting and pointing out people's faults and calling it love doesn't make it so. I had somebody say to me recently, speaking of some of their nagging and pleading and confronting of family members, saying, I know it's just my love. And I said, it's not love. Don't confuse it. It's fear. It's not bad. It's not wrong, but don't call it love. I said, in many cases, in the examples that you're giving, I taught this person, in many cases, love would stay silent. Love would wait. The older that I've gotten this process, see, I started teaching this stuff when I was 28 years old. That's when I started doing this. I'm 55 today. And what I've learned in those 27 years is I've learned that the better I feel about myself, the more easy it is for me to admit my mistakes to people. And I've also learned that I'm nowhere close to arriving. I can still be brought back into that scared little child who was trying to be good, who was trying to prove the world that he was worth love and worth connection. A lot of people worry that the things that I'm teaching tonight could lead or encourage a child or an individual to play the victim. These principles it takes it out of the equation. You know, when I teach you that concept that Einstein shared that says you can't solve a problem from the same level of consciousness in which it was created? You can't solve a problem in the same kind of thinking that created it, in essence. We're taking it out of victim and villain. And we're entering it into the field of humanness, of fallibility, of love, of surrender, of connection. If you do your work, the apology, the amends, the accountability will be easy. And your child will learn over time. I know what it's like to apologize. I know that you can apologize and it doesn't mean that you're unlovable. I know that you can admit a fault, even a big one. And it doesn't mean that you're unworthy of connection and love. Because I've seen it and felt it with my parents. Yes, it's true that people can weaponize skills. And that usually comes when people are trying to apply skills when they haven't done the internal work. Sometimes people will say to me, Brad, what would you say in this situation? In fact, it just happened to me recently. Somebody asked the question, what might you say in this situation with a spouse or a significant other? And I said, if you could trade places with me right now, what I would say based on my work is, and I started off with an apology and with ownership. And after sharing my example of what I would say, the person looked at me and said, well, none of that's true for me. And I said, I believe you. That makes sense. That's why me telling you what to say doesn't work. Because if it's a lie just to get an outcome, then it has no value. It has to be true. That's the difference between Evoke's therapeutic approach, my therapeutic approach, and others, is that the shift that we're inviting you to make is fundamental. Jung said that when somebody comes to therapy, that he believes that the task is to question the whole personality, not the specific incident, not the specific symptom, not the specific dilemma. The problem you're having with your child isn't about the child. It's about your entire life. The problem that you might be having with your grief, with your pain, with your sadness, with your addiction, with your compulsive obsessive, with your anxiety, whatever, with your depression, whatever it is, it's not about those things. It's not limited to those things. It's about your life. James Hollis says these problems are evidence that we've accepted the wrong answers to life's questions. Something deeper. And by the way, way more empowering than the skill set stuff. Way more empowering than the tool set stuff. It takes longer. My broadcasts sound more conceptual than they do practical at times. They sound more philosophical than they do concrete at times. I know that. But I taught all of those things for 10 years. I said all those things that therapists say for 10 years. And I realized after saying it, I'm not telling the truth. And then I went through my own crises, my own life challenge, my own confrontation with my own will to live. And on the other side of it, I decided that I'm going to seek for the truth and not for the simple solutions and the solutions that make me and parents and spouses just feel better temporarily. Like I said, motivational interviewing is a good reference point. If you want research to support everything that I've said, they have literally hundreds of cited research experiments that demonstrate that what I'm teaching you tonight is essentially true. And if you express your amends and your apology and your accountability, if you do it on a daily basis in a small moment, if you model it for your children, they can't use it against you if it comes from a genuine place. Because a genuine apology asks for nothing in return. Accountability is ownership, ultimately. It is, yes, my mother was mean. Yes, my father was mean. Yes, my boss was mean. Yes, my girlfriend, my boyfriend broke up with me. Yes, somebody cut me off. Yes, somebody stole my identity and spent money on my credit cards. Yes, somebody made a mess of things around me and hurt me. But how I chose to deal with it is this. It's the ownership. One of the questions that I will often ask people when teaching this is, what's the difference between an explanation and a justification? What's the difference between an explanation for behavior and a justification? Between accountability and an excuse, what's the difference? And the answer is that a justification is a defense, period. It's a defense against a threat. An excuse is just information. One of the ways you can tell the difference between an explanation and a justification is if somebody doesn't want to hear it or somebody interrupts you, you let it go. But if somebody doesn't want to hear it or interrupts you, and you have to get it out, then it's an ego thing. It's a defense. I have to tell you how I'm not bad, how I'm not wrong, how I am good. I read a quote the other day that I thought was profound, where I think I mentioned it the other night, where some great thinker said, how do you know, I think it was somebody actually from antiquity, how do you know if the person did something wrong if you don't know the reason why? See, in the old way, we have to justify our lives. Our decisions have to be justified. In this new way of living that I'm describing, you don't have to justify yourself. No is a complete sentence. You get to live your life, and you don't owe an explanation to anybody. ownership, the difference between an excuse. It's awareness. Shame and guilt, trying to control what other people think, a fear of not being enough or being too much. Those are all things that get in the way of accountability. And if the family is an unsafe place, those things are going to be at play in significant levels. You have to understand what it means to be a person, to be a self. That's just one way of talking about what we're doing with attachment-based therapy at Evoke. We're trying to teach your children and you how to be a person. And a person is imperfect and messy. Sometimes they're geniuses. Sometimes they're idiots. Sometimes they're generous and kind and loving. And sometimes they're scared and selfish and controlling. They're human. But we have so little experience with that being enough, that being okay. The goal is to create something deeper that lasts. All right. I used to say this in the very beginning that when I first started in my career, kids would complain that their parents sucked. And at first I thought my job was to be a detective and to figure out who sucked and how much. And I was going to be the referee, the judge and jury, right? That's what I thought. And time passed and I failed numerous times. And I realized the way I respond to it when somebody tells me their child sucks or their parent sucks or their spouse sucks, essentially the energy is, not the words. And they have to be ready to hear this, as I say, yeah, your parents suck. And you suck. I pause just long enough to make them wonder what I'm talking about and why I would say such a thing. And then I follow up with, and I suck. And your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your partner is going to suck. Someday your boss, your professors will suck. Your colleagues will suck. Eventually your children will suck. I tell them. I promise you that. But life is not about who sucks. That's just life. It's about how do you deal with it. See, when you accept yourself as a human, that's one way to say it, or when you accept yourself as an idiot, that's the way I talk about it in the Journey of the Heroic Parent on the section on idiot parenting. When you accept yourself as bad, I say it sometimes that way, or evil, to really emphasize it. When you accept yourself as you are, the only thing left over is love. And all that energy that you spend try to defend yourself against those who think you're not good enough or not good, period, or bad in this situation. All the energy spent in defending that now can go towards loving people. That's the secret. That's the mystery. That's the key. That's what the masters have been teaching us. That's what the stories show us. That's what the myths show us. You learn to accept yourself as an idiot and you're free. And you end up giving people what you know that they need because you know that you need it. Love and grace. That's what the movie or the play or the book Les Mis is about. Les Miserables. When the bishop gives back the candlestick, Victor Hugo is showing us that's what people need. That's the energy that's involved in healing. We learn to forgive ourselves first and then to forgive our child. The more you know yourself, the more compassion you will have for all the other idiots in the world, period. The more you are in touch with, as Jung says, your own darkness, the easier it will be to understand the darkness of others. Do you know why I can teach these things? And if you find my teaching at all unique, and maybe you don't, maybe you find my teaching ridiculous, but if you find my teaching unique at all, if you feel like it's fresh at all and a slightly new perspective than what you've heard, what you're hearing is not my study, not my reading. There's plenty of that. And I have plenty of letters after my name. But what you're hearing is my own work, my own contact with my own darkness. My patience in loving somebody who's struggling, who's doing the same thing over and over and over again, whether it be a parent or a child, my patience with them started with me, because when I woke up to what an idiot I'd been my whole life and how much I've lied my whole life to please other people, of course I justified it, to please other people, but I was a liar. When I woke up to that reality, how could I judge everybody else? I either had to give up my life and end it because I was convicted, or I had to decide that I was worthy of a life. And when I chose the latter, I wanted to give everybody else the same grace that I experienced. And grace doesn't mean no boundaries. That's the old way. People in recovery from codependency and trauma have clearer boundaries, are more assertive. They're less angry and abusive, and they're less passive. See, anger and attacking and abusive and assaultive behavior and passiveness, those are just the opposite sides of the same coin. That's the old thinking, the old paradigm, the old construct. Guilt is as toxic as shame. I'll just say it this way. I remember about 10 years ago, I said to my clinical team about 10 years ago, after having years of debate on the subject, I finally said to them, look, I'm not going to debate this idea of healthy guilt anymore. I'm over it. Everybody here in this room, I said to them, and everybody listening to me, can easily bring to mind at least one experience where doing the right thing would cause them to feel guilty. And when you can feel guilty for doing the right thing, you know then it's an unreliable resource. It's an unreliable source of morality. I cannot tell you the numbers of times I've had clients say to me, including parents, I knew the right thing to do, but I just didn't do it. And when I ask them why, inevitably the answer is because I felt guilty. It is our attempts to be good that causes our suffering. The belief that we can be good, that it's even possible. So yeah, guilt has to go the way of shame. It can cause us to ask questions. We can get curious about it. But if it becomes the measure and the dictator of right and wrong, we're in a lot of trouble. It's remarkable, I wrote in The Journey of the Heroic Parent, how often guilt and shame prevent rather than encourage parents and children to do the right thing. Guilt makes us pay too much attention to how others feel about us, rather than focusing on what is the best course of action for ourselves. I encourage parents to, quote, feel the guilt and do the right thing anyway, unquote. We are not responsible for what others think about us, including our children. We're responsible for our own actions, for being good parents and being good people. You see how the themes of accountability are so connected to guilt? We're responsible for our own actions, for being good parents and for being good people. I'm using the word good loosely here. The more appropriate word would be adequate, perhaps. In turn, our children are responsible for what they choose, for the way that they choose to respond. Don't engage in the cycle of dependence. Let them think or feel about you however they want. It's not about your kids loving you or not. That's not their job. It's about you loving them. And loving them means that sometimes you have to do difficult things, even things that make them hate you. As parents, we need to tolerate guilt in order to do the right things for our children. And like my 28-year-old daughter said last year, and I shared it in a quote, perhaps the greatest love that a parent can demonstrate is the willingness to be cast as the villain in the child's story. And I don't mean be an ass and be cruel. I mean that when you set a healthy boundary, when you take a stance that's healthy, it comes from a place of love and clarity and courage. When you share your truth from a place of love and clarity and courage. When the child says, you did X, Y, Z, and you won't agree with it. You won't agree with what your kids say about you. We never do. And some of it is inaccurate in its specific form. But eventually things come out to balance. And we show our children that we have grown up. So for the take-home messages, accountability asks for little in return. It's ownership. It doesn't ask for something in return. It's a gift of love. Guilt and shame are not vehicles that we can rely on for healthy change. Accountability is difficult, I would venture to say nearly impossible, where shame is intense and high and where there is judgment. Accountability takes courage and healing. Since you're the adult, let it start with you. Model it. No matter what percent is your fault, model it. And when your children accuse you and tell a story about you that's not true, don't get hung up on it. Keep your boundaries the way they are. You don't have to change. You don't have to capitulate, but let them work through it and let them show that you're a safe person. Accountability tolerates many responses, including increased anger. Remember in my daughter's example with her fingernail, remember that. She was able to sense that this apology, this accountability, this amends that her friend was making was for the friend, not for my daughter. All right, folks. The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You are available on Amazon and Audible. I encourage all of you to get a version of these. This systemically goes through all of this. If you want to attend to Finding You, if you want to do a deep dive into your own work, I cannot recommend more strongly, more powerfully, Finding You. September 20th through 24th is the next offering. We also have an online offering September 15th through 17th. These will sell out. If you worry about the conflict of interest that we might have in selling a product, go to on-site workshops, go to theirs. Go to the House of the Calla with Judy Crane, go there. Go to the Bridge Recovery in Kentucky. Go to the Meadows in Arizona. I think on-site even has one in Southern California. Go to somebody else's, if at all there's any doubt. I prefer ours. I like ours the best. I think ours is based on a deeper and more profound clinical model than theirs. But I've sent many friends and all of my family to the on-site version, and I myself have been to on-site 8 times. Returning to You is our second stage of Finding You. If you want to come back, the October 25th through 29th is sold out, but we'll be adding another one after the beginning of the year. So sign up plenty ahead of the time. And then we're going to be back in the spring in the UK to do one there. We have custom programs for couples, co-parents, and families. Contact intensives@evoketherapy.com to find out more. We have support groups for alumni and current families tonight at 7 p.m. In fact, 4 minutes ago. If you're listening to me live, you've missed it. But August 24th is the next offering. It's tonight's offering, and there'll be one again next week. Once a month, we have an alumni-only meeting. September 26th at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time is that offering. And then we have a once-a-month intensives support group. September 12th at 6 p.m. is the next offering. Go to our website to find out more. We have family treks. These are multi-day immersive experiences with your child in the wilderness. They can be during the middle of your child's program. If you want to really dive in, they can be at the end of the program, between programs. They can be after the next program. They can even be if you haven't even been to wilderness at all. It's a multi-day wilderness experiential program with your child. Contact admissions@evoketherapy.com for more information on our family treks. We have coaches that work with folks virtually. Parents, couples, families, individuals, codependency, transitioning home, stage of life issues, guilt, shame, accountability, all the stuff that I'm talking about tonight, attachment, trauma, anxiety, depression, substance use disorder, all available for our coaching services. Contact coaching@evoketherapy.com for more information. Like I mentioned earlier and mentioned every time, we ask all current parents to attend 6 of any of the following 12-step support groups: Al-Anon.org, CODA.org, FamiliesAnonymous.org, or AdultChildren.org. You can also go to RefugeRecovery.org or the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI.org, has free classes and resources in your local community. All of these broadcasts are available on Spotify or your favorite podcast app. Just go to that app and search Finding You, an Evoke Therapy podcast, and listen there, subscribe, share with your friends. You can also go to soundcloud.com on your computer, and you can also watch the rebroadcast of these on Evoke's YouTube channel. You can find Evoke Therapy programs and me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on Twitter, Threads, and Instagram using the handles @Evoke Therapy and @Dr. Brad Reedy, respectively. And you can find our intensives program on Instagram using the handle @Evoke Therapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And of course, we have a wonderful blog that is curated that's contributed to by our staff, who share not just what you need to know, but their own personal experience with finding their authentic self. If you want to give back to people that can't afford treatment or you are in need of such help, the 3 charitable partners that we work with are ChooseMentalHealth.org, Sky'sTheLimitFund.org, or EvokeFamilyFoundation.org. My next broadcast will be August 29th. That's next Tuesday, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Be a live Q&A. You can always send in questions, suggestions, topics to webinar@evoketherapy.com. Any questions that get sent in via that email will be at the top of the Q&A. You can also share this link with your family and friends, with siblings of the identified patient, and we're happy to welcome them to the live Q&A. That's next Tuesday, August 29th, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. All right, folks. I hope this is a helpful point of contact for you all. And for on behalf of the people that you love and the people that love you, thank you for showing up and being willing to do your work. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.